After the car accident, I was rushed to the hospital. Before the anesthesia took full effect, I heard the surgeon on call on the phone. He said, "William, are you sure you want to remove the entire uterus? This will cause great harm to the patient's body. The recovery process after the surgery will be difficult." "Yes, her uterus must be removed. I have Ethan. One child is enough." I shed a tear. It turns out that Ethan is not the child of his dead comrade. I lost all hope. There can be no betrayal in love, so I chose to let go, give him freedom. Suddenly, a sharp pain erupted from the depths of my abdomen. I couldn't help but vomit a large mouthful of blood. Blood pressure is too low. Can't stop the bleeding. Quickly transfuse blood. I can smell the blood all around me. The patient is still conscious. Quickly inject propofol. At that time, it was raining heavily outside. 3 years ago that night, William came back holding Ethan, saying that this was the only bloodline left from his comrades. That was the first time I saw Ethan. The young nurse said with a trembling voice, "Director, she is pregnant. It's already been 6 weeks." The lead surgeon responded immediately. Why didn't the medical records say that she was pregnant? While I was in a daze, I suddenly remembered something. At the shooting range, William embraced me from behind, grabbed my hand and pulled the trigger. When the bullet hit the bullseye, my heart gave a sharp thump. He whispered a little laugh in my ear and said, "My dear, what a shot. This belated bullet pierced my chest. It instantly penetrated me. Blood was gushing. Tell William quickly, in case something happens to the baby." "No, William doesn't have time for that right now," the assistant said over the phone. "Stick to the plan. Sort things out." When William woke up again, he was sitting by the bed with red eyes. When he saw me open my eyes, he visibly relaxed. He bent down and gave me a soft kiss on the forehead. He said, "You're finally awake. I'm glad you're okay." His voice trembled. I still had no expression on my face. Seeing that I didn't react, he felt that I was still not yet recovered. William hurriedly called the doctor. The doctor looked at me sympathetically, but then he swallowed his words. The doctor prescribed some sleeping pills. He said that I was recovering well, but the hysterectomy had been a huge shock. It had put a lot of pressure on me. Perhaps I had taken too many sleeping pills over the years. My body had become used to them. I lay there for a long time without falling asleep. William looked at me and saw that I was motionless with my eyes closed. He thought I had fallen asleep. I heard him sigh. "Don't blame me. I had no choice. I promised Emily to take good care of her child. I know you have a kind heart, but when you have your own child, I'm afraid it will be hard to treat Ethan like your own. For Ethan's sake, we can't have any more children." So that's the truth. I've heard the name Emily before. I first knew her at her funeral. At that time, William and I had just got married. William didn't react much to her death. He calmly told me that she was his first love. He said that Emily broke up with him and in a fit of anger married a gambler. The gambler often abused her. This caused her to become depressed. In the end, she jumped into the sea and killed herself. Her body has never been found. In the coffin were only the clothes she wore during her lifetime. At the time, after hearing this story, I just felt that life is unpredictable. I didn't think much about it. But now, when I repeatedly think back to that scene, I feel a little strange. At that time, although he was smiling, there was no smile in his eyes. As I thought about it, I fell asleep. When I woke up again, William was still by the bedside. He looked very tired. He kept rubbing his forehead. When he saw that I had woken up, he immediately put down what he was doing. When he saw me sitting up, he moved very gently. He was very careful. The 2 nurses next to him glanced at each other. Their eyes were full of envy and curiosity. They spoke in a low voice. "William is so good to his wife. He has been here the whole time. He hasn't left once." Yes, everyone knows that William is a man who loves his wife very much. The more I listened, the more uncomfortable I felt. After the nurse left, William began to tease me. "What's wrong? Is my wife shy?" I kept my mouth shut. I didn't look at him. He thought I was still upset about losing my uterus. "Don't be sad. We still have Ethan, don't we? When Ethan is a bit older, I'll enroll him in a school club. Then we can spend some time together." William puts his arms around me. He chuckles softly in my ear. In the past, I used to say similar things. I always said that no matter how hard life got, I would never let myself suffer. When the children were older, I would enroll them in a club. I would spend time with William. We would travel. But now I can't laugh at all. My children are gone, and they will never come back. At that moment, I suddenly noticed a brown stain on William's cuff. I recognized it. It was the watercolor paint that was unique to William's private studio. It mixed with the smell of turpentine. There was a painting hidden in his studio. It showed a girl in school uniform standing on a reef. She was smiling happily. That girl was Emily. Even when I was in the car accident and my life was in danger, he would go to the studio to see her. When did I see this painting? It was just before the accident. William's studio was never open to anyone, not even me. He usually liked to stay in the studio all day long. Once, Ethan ran into the studio mischievously. He found out about this and was very angry, even though the work in the studio was not damaged at all. That was also the first time I realized the studio held a lot of weight in his heart. To be precise, it wasn't the studio itself that was important. It was the painting that was particularly important. After that day, I had a vague feeling about something. I finally couldn't hold back any longer. I snuck into the studio when he wasn't home. The studio was full of works. Most of the paintings featured Ethan and me, but the most eye-catching one was the life-size portrait framed beautifully and as big as the wall. The person in the painting is the one in the photo at the funeral. He locked himself in here, watching Emily every second of the day. I was both sad and angry. I ended up in a car accident. Where is Ethan? I want to see him. As soon as I opened my mouth, I was shocked at my own voice. It was hoarse like a rusty blade. William suddenly tightened his grip on my hand. His eyes were full of pain. That look reminded me of that special funeral, when he saw the belongings in Emily's coffin. He was also so confused and panicked. William told me, Ethan has returned to the old mansion. My parents are with him. William's father and mother have always loved Ethan very much. I originally thought it was because they were broad-minded. They could accept a child who was not related by blood as their grandson. Now that I think about it, they must have known that Ethan was William's child. From beginning to end, I was the only one who was kept in the dark. I was in the hospital for more than half a month. He visited me every day, but on the day I was discharged, he didn't show up. I didn't even get his call. I took a taxi home. As soon as I entered the entrance hall, I heard someone laughing in the back room. I walked in. Everyone looked at me. In addition to William and Ethan, there was also a young girl I had never seen before. She seemed to be particularly unhappy with me. As soon as I appeared, she snorted. Turning her face to one side, William looked at me, a little surprised. I thought you weren't being discharged until tomorrow. It's today, I casually responded, not paying much attention. William, however, looked guilty. He looked at me carefully, afraid I would be angry. Ethan also happily threw himself at me. Mum, the girl suddenly stood up, pushing Ethan back onto the sofa. She said angrily, She's not your mother. She's William reacted faster than I did. Sophia. Sophia and Emily were the names that raced through my head. Sophia didn't seem to worry about upsetting William. She crossed her arms and said, You're just a third party. Stop it, William shouted. Then he turned to look at me. I noticed that Sophia's words hadn't upset me. He let out a sigh of relief. Then, and he took me in his arms, he added, Uncle, please ask Sophia to leave. Sophia looked pale, her eyes were wide. It was as if she wanted to devour me. Ethan didn't know what was going on. He understood that the little girl who always played with him with his toys was leaving. He was very unhappy. He immediately sat on the floor and burst into tears. Daddy, I want Sister Sophia to play with me. William ignored his cries and told the housekeeper to throw Sophia out. Then he picked me up and carried me to the second floor. I didn't resist. He was too close to me now. I felt uncomfortable all over. We entered the bedroom. He put me on the bed. William looked at me. His eyes were full of tenderness and love. Don't mind her. That one was just crazy. Who is she? I asked. He said, She is Emily's younger sister. Back when Emily and I were together, she was just a little kid. She knew nothing. He thought that because I broke up with her sister, I was a scumbag, he said. I couldn't help but laugh. He probably didn't realize it himself. He was just defending Sophia. There was once a suitor who said in front of me that I wasn't worthy of being with William. Without saying a word, he kicked that person out of the party. He also said, Anyone who doesn't respect me in the future will be crossing the Smith family. Not long after, the girl's family went bankrupt. The whole family moved abroad. I haven't heard from them since. But now, Sophia called me a mistress to my face. He just casually ignored it, because Sophia is Emily's younger sister. He also fell in love with her. At that moment, Ethan ran in crying. Amidst the commotion, I noticed that Ethan was wearing a green bracelet on his hand. I had asked for it for my child. I lost my mind. My child died so tragically, and his bastard is standing here fine. I pulled on the bracelet like crazy. Ethan was scared. He cried even more. William came back to his senses. He pushed me away. I was still not fully recovered. This push sent me straight into the wall. It felt like my insides had shifted. The wounds on my body opened up. It oozed blood. William didn't notice any of this. He picked up Ethan and comforted him. He even looked at me with reproachful eyes. He had never looked at me with such cold eyes before. Ethan also pointed at me and shouted, "Bad woman, bad woman." William didn't argue with him. He only said to me, "Calm down." I was completely desperate. No matter how painful the wounds on my body were, a nanny came in. She saw that I was pale. She hurried over and asked, Madam, are you okay?" I pressed down on the open wound, and with great difficulty I managed to say a few words. "Quickly, take me to the hospital." As soon as I finished speaking, I lost consciousness. Fortunately, the injury was not serious. The doctor restitched the wound, gave me a few instructions, and let me go home. The doctor also said, "The doctor who performed the hysterectomy was very skilled. There are no after effects." I froze. I felt this was too ridiculous. However, you still need to take care of yourself. Otherwise, it will still be very dangerous. After reading my medical report, the doctor gave me some more advice. I nodded. Then I was discharged. As soon as I walked out of the hospital, William's phone rang. "Where have you been?" "Outside." I gave him a vague answer. William was at a loss for words. His tone was still so hard. "Who let me almost hurt his precious son? Ethan's birthday is in 2 days. You prepare well. Whether you can make Ethan forgive you depends on your performance." I couldn't help but laugh. I took care of my husband's illegitimate child as carefully as my own. It's ridiculous. I tried hard to hold back my tears. I asked William, "Do you remember what I said? I can't stand cheating and betrayal." William sensed something was wrong. He didn't think much of it. "I've just been so depressed since the accident," he thought. "Losing my uterus must have been a big blow." Thinking about this, William felt a little guilty. He spoke softly. "Don't think too much. Come home soon. Ethan and I are waiting for you." Hang up the phone. I sat on a bench by the roadside. I've come to my senses. He and I had to part ways. When I saw the portrait he had drawn, I knew there was no hope for me and William. I couldn't help but burst into tears. Because of my impulsiveness and lack of reason, I lost my child. I didn't go straight home. First, I went to see a lawyer to discuss the divorce. After all that, it was already dark. During this time, William didn't call once. Sophia added me. The first thing she said was, "HMPH, an affair will never end well." I had originally thought that if I didn't see it, it wouldn't happen. I was going to block her, but she had already guessed my thoughts. "Don't block me. Don't you want to hear about my sister and William?" My hand, which was about to block her, stopped. Messages kept coming in. "Did William tell you that my sister married a gambler because she was angry with him?" That's not true. My sister was the one who broke up with him because she is a strong woman. She wanted to pursue her own dreams. My sister broke up with him so that she could study abroad. You don't know how sad William was when he cried. He begged my sister not to go. Then, the screen played a surveillance video from the airport. In the video, William looked very young. The teenager was wearing a school uniform. He ran all the way, running with sweat all over his face. He desperately held onto the girl in front of him. "Don't go. Emily, don't go." Emily ignored him completely. She simply shook his hand off and walked away without looking back. Once Emily was gone, William's whole body went numb. He even vomited a mouthful of blood on the spot. The video suddenly ended, just by looking at William's expression. You could tell how much he loved Emily. I always thought William was someone who could remain calm even when the sky fell after all. Over the years I've known him. No matter what happened, he's always been very calm. I never thought he had this side to him. Emily left. It seemed to take half his life, these past few days. I haven't gone back. I found an excuse and stayed at the hotel directly, unexpectedly. William didn't ask too many questions. When I heard that I wasn't going back, he was actually relieved. On Ethan's birthday, I took a taxi to the Smith family mansion early in the morning. As soon as I arrived at the front door of the Smith family mansion, someone accidentally bumped into my shoulder. I didn't have time to turn around. I heard a gentle female voice, "William, I'm back." I froze. William stood not far away. He also looked at a loss. He stared at her blankly, as if everything around them had disappeared. Only the two of them remained. I immediately knew who had come. My body stiffened as I looked at the person. Emily looked very beautiful. She was wearing a white dress. From a distance, she looked like a goddess of purity. She kept staring at William. She didn't even look at me. Those beautiful eyes of hers were clearly full of delight and attachment. Anyone could tell. The whole scene suddenly became much quieter. Most of the guests present didn't know Emily. Seeing William's reaction, everyone guessed what was going on in their hearts. Many people's eyes sparkled with curiosity. The guests looked curiously at Emily, who had suddenly appeared. When William's parents arrived, they ran into Emily. In fact, they didn't have a good impression of Emily. Who wants to see their son lose his mind over a woman? William's father frowned. He was full of surprise. William's mother couldn't help but look at Ethan. There was a hint of embarrassment in her eyes. "You aren't dead already. You came back." William's mother's speech was a bit confused. Emily behaved with grace. She was very polite. She smiled and said gently, "Auntie, I'm still alive. Someone rescued me back then. I fell into the sea. I hit my head and lost my memory. That's why I never came back." Her voice was particularly soft. Every word felt like a spring breeze. William finally came back to his senses. He finally stopped looking at her. He walked over and took my hand. "Good morning. Everyone, this is my wife. She doesn't often attend parties. If I have not taken good care of you, please forgive me. Today is our son Ethan's birthday. I hope you all have a good time." His voice sounded as usual, but his hand that was holding mine was shaking slightly. Something was obviously wrong with him. Emily stared at him. Her face was wearing a wry smile. She suddenly walked over to William, pointing at his white suit. She said, "William, after all these years, we still have a good understanding of each other." This sounded a bit vague. Many people heard it, although the guests were curious. They didn't dare to stare. Just then, the protagonist of the party, Ethan, appeared. He was followed by a 2-meter-high big cake. The spotlight shone on this little figure. He smiled especially brightly. He waved to William's parents, William and his mother, who were at the bottom of the stage. The 2 elderly people hurried up. They kept shouting, "My dear, big grandson." Emily's eyes were red. That was his child. William stayed by my side the whole time. He took my hand and we went up on stage together. We were a family of 5. On the surface, we were happy and content. We blew out the birthday candles to the sound of everyone's best wishes. After all that was done, I noticed that Emily was gone. William also seemed a little distracted. Ethan hadn't finished making his wish yet. He just went straight off the stage. William's parents were shouting at him from behind, but he pretended not to hear. He ran straight out of the party room. Ethan started crying again. I usually care about him a lot, but at the moment, his crying made me feel particularly annoyed. William's mother picked him up. She whispered something to him. None of them are easy to handle. William's father immediately stopped her. "That's enough, stop it." After that, they both looked at me at the same time. Seeing that I didn't react, they let out a quiet sigh of relief. After 10 minutes or so, William and Emily walked in together. Emily's eyes were red and swollen. It was obvious that she had just cried. William looked serious. Something was wrong. William's parents also looked a little uncomfortable. William's mother looked at me, as if she wanted to say something, but William's father stopped her with a glance. William suddenly looked up at me. His face was full of guilt and unease. He wanted to come over and talk to me, but Emily stopped him. Emily asked in a low voice, "Didn't you say you wanted to introduce me to Ethan?" I froze. Was William going to tell everyone the truth? Ethan was still crying in William's mother's arms. His face was covered in tears. He looked up from time to time and shouted, "Bad daddy, bad daddy." William didn't seem to hear his son's cries. He just stared nervously at me for some reason. This scene made me laugh. I handed Ethan the gift I had prepared. "Ethan, be good. Don't cry." The gift I gave Ethan was the teddy bear he had always wanted. He really liked it. He stopped crying immediately. William came over. He looked at me and said, "Honey, I have something I want to discuss with you." I guessed what it was. He took my hand. He led me to the pavilion outside. When we arrived at the pavilion, William took a deep breath and said, "Actually, Ethan is Emily's child." I nodded. "I understand." He looked at me in surprise. William's lips moved. It seems he had thought of something. He hurriedly looked at me. "Honey," but I didn't expose him. I just smiled slightly. They both look quite similar, I guessed it. After I said that, he obviously relaxed. He said, "Today, I want to announce Ethan's identity in front of everyone, because he is Emily's child. In addition, I will also announce to the world that he is my child. Don't you worry, he is not my child. He is my comrade's. Oh, they just went out for 10 minutes to discuss this matter. Until now, he still wants to deceive me." He saw me with my head down, thinking I was upset. He whispered an explanation. "Don't worry, I only said that to deal with outsiders. I don't want people to think that Ethan is from an unknown source." "Child," I froze. Someone had indeed said that his opponent had once joked. William picked up a kid off the street and claimed it was his, all these years. He had kept Ethan's real identity a secret, but now that they were getting divorced, I didn't want to rack my brain over it. I handed him a document. It contained the divorce agreement. I told him, "Okay, but first you need to sign this." "What document?" He froze for a moment. "A contract for the transfer of a beach house." William smiled. He signed the contract without hesitation. He thought I was just being emotional. I carefully put the contract away, into my bag, and returned to the party. Everyone looked over curiously. William's parents, William and Emily, looked serious. They seemed to have understood something, and turned their attention to Emily at the same time. Emily stared at William, her eyes full of expectation. William walked up to the stage. Before he was about to speak, he looked at me again. Seeing that I didn't react, he became a little uneasy. But then he saw Emily looking at him expectantly. He made up his mind. "I have an announcement to make. It's about Ethan. He will be the heir to the Smith family." The guests applauded. Ethan, holding her teddy bear, had no idea what this meant. William sighed. Then he continued. "Ethan, actually, he is the child of pianist Emily and me. Ethan is our Smith family's child." Once the words were out, they immediately caused a wave of surprise. William's father, William's mother's face turned very bad. They did want Ethan to appear in front of everyone as a biological child of the Smith family, but it should never be under such circumstances. A trace of smugness flashed in Emily's eyes. She had long understood. As long as she cried, William would support her. The so-called cuckold was just a joke. She also walked up to the stage and came to William's side. They looked very compatible, like a real couple. Ethan, however, felt confused and lost. He seemed to sense that things were not as simple as they seemed. So he hugged his teddy bear tightly. He gently tugged me and asked in a low voice, "Mom, am I not your child?" Ethan's tone was full of worry. I finally relented. I crouched down and looked at Ethan and said, "Ethan, you'll have another mommy to love you." Ethan suddenly burst into tears. He said, "I don't want to, Mommy. I can only have one mommy. I don't want her. She's a bad woman." Ethan said she was a bad person. I actually felt a little relieved when I heard it. Ethan treats everyone equally. "I don't want a new mommy. She's a bad person." His voice echoed through the ballroom. The scene became even more chaotic. The party ended in a flurry of noise. The guests left one after the other. William's father, William's mother angrily dragged Ethan into the room. William, Emily and I stayed in the hall. Emily looked at me. Nodding, she said, "I heard that you have been very good to Ethan over the years. From now on, let me take care of him." I nodded expressionlessly. Seeing me like this, Emily felt uninteresting. She pretended to be very dignified. In fact, she hoped I would be angry. She said, "I know you're not happy, but you have to believe me. I never intended to interfere with your family." I glared at her. What a hypocrite. Since she put it that way, I would not hold back. I did not take her up on her offer. Instead, I asked, "You probably have too much confidence. Ethan doesn't seem to recognize you as his new mother." Emily froze for a moment. She had indeed considered this question before. From the day the baby was born, she had been planning her fake death since the day the baby was born. She understood. Only by making William truly lose her would he learn to cherish her. She was determined to be the eternal white moon in William's heart. If she wanted William, she would have to give up something. As for Ethan, she and William could have more children in the future. Thinking about this, she smiled confidently again. The child is still young. He doesn't understand. Over time, he will naturally accept me, seeing how well we get along. William always feels uncomfortable. Something like that happened at the banquet. How could I not be angry? William pulled his tie. He felt like he couldn't breathe properly. "Emily, you go back first. I'll ask the butler to send you." Emily had originally planned to use Ethan as an excuse to stay at the old mansion, but seeing William's bad complexion, she dismissed the idea. This needs to be done slowly. After she left, without saying a word, William dragged me into the bedroom. He was very strong. My wrists ached from the strain. With a thud, he slammed the door shut. He turned to me and stared straight at me. "What's wrong with you lately? You've been acting strange." His voice was a little shaky. He couldn't hide it. He felt that I was his wife. I shouldn't have been so calm when I saw Emily. I gave a cold smile. You see, he knows that getting close to Emily will make me sad, but he still does it. I rubbed my wrists and said, "I don't understand what you mean." After that, I turned around and wanted to leave, talking to him for one more sentence. "I'm tired of it." William looked at the faint, almost detached smile on my face. His eyebrows furrowed. He always felt like something was out of his control. Since when did I change? Well, it was the car accident. Ever since that accident. Is losing your uterus really that harmful to a woman? At this moment, William felt a little remorse. A deep sense of self-blame and powerlessness welled up in his heart. William looked at the other person's impatient expression and suddenly remembered my pale face lying in the hospital bed. He then realized that he had been too unconcerned about me during this period of time. He had been busy with work, worrying about Ethan and Emily's side of things, but completely forgot about me, who had just had a car accident. William walked up to me. His eyes were full of anxiety and unease. Be good. If you're feeling bad, just tell me. I couldn't help but laugh. Tell him. Will that bring my child back? My eyes were cold. William, I just suddenly realized I don't love you anymore. William took a step back. He almost didn't stand firm. He stared at me with wide eyes. He said, no way. You're just trying to annoy me. I shrugged, as if I didn't care. It didn't matter if he believed me or not. I was leaving in a few days anyway. The next few days, William seemed to be avoiding me. He wasn't home all day. I particularly liked that. While he was away, I started to sort through my belongings. I threw away a lot of things. The house looked much more spacious. Ethan was still living with William's parents in the old house. That day, I was packing the last of my things. The doorbell suddenly rang. I was taken aback. It couldn't be William. I looked through the peephole. It was Emily and Sophia. I was relieved to see it was them. I opened the door. What brings you here today? I said in a strange tone of voice. Emily gave a small smile. Sophia stood next to her, holding her arms in front of her chest, staring at me. Emily spoke first. She made her position clear. I'll tell you, I must get William. You'd better understand. Hurry up and go. Sophia followed suit. Yes, Ethan told me everything. William still has my sister's portrait in his studio. He goes there every day. Since you know who he likes, you should leave. Hurry up and go. Speaking of portraits, I was a little distracted for a moment. Seeing that I was silent, Sophia tried to rush over and push me. Emily reached out to stop her. He slowly took out his phone and opened a video. Amidst everyone's jeers, Emily grabbed William's tie, pulled him in front of her, and kissed him on the initiative. William froze for a moment, then deepened the kiss. That tie, I bought it for William last month. My stomach churned, seeing Emily's smug expression. I subconsciously pushed her phone away. I didn't even touch her, but she suddenly screamed and fell backwards, rolling down the stairs. William appeared at just the right moment. He immediately rushed over, without thinking about anything else. Emily, are you okay? William's voice was a little shaky. He sounded nervous. Sophia saw this. She immediately came up to me. She slapped me. She accused me. How dare you push my sister down the stairs? I covered my face with my hands. My mind went blank. I glanced at William, who kept his head down. He was staring at Emily in his arms. Eventually, he stood up. He looked straight at me with disappointed eyes. But to my surprise, William didn't shout at me. He just hugged Emily and turned to leave. Before leaving, he paused and said something that was so calm it was frightening. Wait for me. Wait until they've gone. I leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. I went back into the room and continued packing. After I had gathered all my things that belonged to me in the house, I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. Before leaving, I placed the divorce papers, signed by both parties, on the coffee table in the living room, where they would be most visible. As I was about to board the plane, I get a text message from William. He says, "Wait for me at home, we need to talk." I shake my head with a bitter smile. There is nothing left to say, and I have no intention of waiting for him. The plane slowly lifts off. Everything is coming to an end. A dozen hours later, it lands in a beautiful city. The sun is shining. If it weren't for the pile of missed calls and text messages on my phone, it would feel even better. I don't read any of them. Most of the messages were from William. I rented a small house with a yard in a corner by the sea. I lived alone. I led a free and quiet life. I didn't expect William to go crazy at home. He found out that I had left. He desperately looked for me. He kept looking at the divorce agreement again and again. Tears kept falling. He didn't completely trust Emily. After taking Emily to the hospital, he immediately went to the property to check the surveillance video. The surveillance video showed that it was indeed Emily who fell by herself. Thinking about his suspicion of me when Emily fell, he felt so remorseful that he wanted to hit himself. He hurried home. He wanted to explain to me. He felt that he had spoiled me over the years. This time, he definitely had to coax me to get my forgiveness. He returned home. He found the house empty. There was a divorce agreement on the coffee table. At that time, I was leisurely basking in the sun in the courtyard. There was a fat cat in the neighbor's house. It always came over to enjoy the sun with me. I stroked the cat while listening to music. I felt very relaxed. That day, I went for a walk at the beach as usual. The fat cat followed me. The sunset was particularly beautiful. It made the sea surface turn red. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I was immersed in it. Suddenly, I heard a familiar and anxious voice. "Honey, I've finally found you." I froze for a moment. I really hoped I was hearing things. I turned around, and there was the last person in the world I wanted to see. William was looking at me with a happy face. He had lost a lot of weight. His face was unshaven. It was sunken in. His hair was a mess. His tie was untied. As soon as he saw me, he hurried over to me. "Wife," he said, "why did you go? Why did you divorce me?" I quickly came out of my shock. My emotions calmed down. "Didn't I tell you before? I don't love you anymore." "No, you were just angry. I understand." He stared at me stubbornly and despairingly. I shook my head. My tone was full of disappointment. "No, my child died because of you. Do you think I can forgive you?" William froze for a moment. His eyes widened. His body swayed. He blurted out, "What child?" "It's the child you lost during the hysterectomy." William's face turned pale at the sound of this. "I understand. I know it was him who removed my uterus." His hands kept shaking. "What child?" he asked again. He had no idea I was pregnant. Seeing his state, I leaned closer and continued. "During the operation that day, I was actually not completely unconscious. I heard everything. This is impossible. How could you?" William explained, flustered, but his voice gradually trailed off. The sea breeze caressed my face. The fat cat rubbed against my feet, as if to comfort me. I crouched down and stroked it, but tears flowed uncontrollably. William tried to come closer, but stopped again. He pleaded, "The child's matter. I really don't know. I beg you, give me a chance. Let me make amends." I listened. I just found it absurd. I didn't want to hear him speak anymore. I turned around and walked away. William didn't dare follow. He watched my back grow further and further away. His spirit, which had lasted so long, suddenly collapsed. He collapsed straight to the ground. Afterwards, William returned to his country. I saw him being interviewed by the press at the airport on the news. He didn't look well. Emily went to pick him up, but he pushed her away in front of everyone. He said to her angrily, "How dare you come to me under the flash of the camera?" Emily's face became increasingly pale. She felt it was just a fall down the stairs. As long as she explained it clearly, she would be fine. William loved her so much. He even hid her portrait. She didn't realize William hated her now. A month later, I saw another piece of domestic news. The Smith family had collapsed. The news also included photos taken by a reporter. The photos showed sisters Emily and Sophia losing control of themselves. They were arguing loudly in front of the old Smith family mansion. The last few photos showed them being thrown out mercilessly by the bodyguards. They looked very disheveled. I also heard that the assistant who answered the doctor's call, who said they had to get rid of the children's assistant, was also fired. William sent Ethan abroad too. He seemed to have lost his mind. He did all these things like a madman. Half a month later, I saw him again. He was now neatly dressed. His beard was clean-shaven. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. He said, "Wife, I've come to take you home." I pushed the flowers in front of me away. They were particularly irritating. "Don't you understand? I don't love you anymore," I said coldly. "No, you just care about Emily. I've made her life difficult. The two sisters will only be able to live in a small rented room. It will be difficult for them to get ahead in life." He spoke in a hurry. He confessed. Emily's resurrection had left him a little dazed, but it was only because of that obsession in the beginning. After I left, he realized that my heart was already filled with me. As for the studio, at first he couldn't forget Emily, so he kept her portrait there. But then, his eyes and thoughts turned to me. He started painting me nonstop. He painted so many portraits of me. During the years William hid in the studio, at first he was there to see Emily. But then, for the next few years, he was there to paint me. He wouldn't let anyone else in. He was afraid I'd get the wrong idea. But why didn't he just destroy Emily's portrait? Maybe he still can't let go. He can't accept that he was abandoned by Emily when he loved her the most. He only found out recently. Emily left him because she had fallen in love with someone else. Emily took the child and went with the other man. I don't care what William is thinking now. I stepped on the roses and said to William, "Unless you can bring my child back to life, I will never forgive you." The hope in his eyes vanished instantly. I continued to provoke him. If murder wasn't a crime, you'd already be dead. I leafed through the police report. I was determined to see William punished by the law. He had to take responsibility for his mistake, more than just regret. William stared into my determined eyes. He saw that there was no love left in them. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I didn't hesitate. I turned and walked away in the sunset. My shadow stretched long. The fat cat followed you. Occasionally looking back, William was still standing in the same place. It seemed very curious. William looked at my back and slowly knelt on the beach. A few days later, I received a notice from the police in my country. William had turned himself in. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. As soon as the news broke, public opinion immediately exploded. No one expected it. William, who had always been known as a crazy husband, actually hired someone to remove his wife's uterus himself. He lost all support. He was blamed by everyone. Even the parents of the Smith family publicly stated that they no longer recognized him. Many years later, I happened to pass by a gallery. I was captivated by a painting inside. It showed a woman standing by the sea. There was also a cat at her feet. That was how I looked many years ago. I turned and walked away. I didn't linger. The light of the setting sun shone on me. I walked towards a better tomorrow.